Hello and welcome to the Geeks Review. I'm Royce.
I'm Jacob.
X-Men is a Marvel comic created in the 1960s. While Spider-Man got his powers from radioactive spider-bite, the Fantastic Four from cosmic rays, and the Hulk his powers from gamma radiation, the X-Men were instead mutants, born with their powers and shunned by society for having them. Written during the Civil Rights Movement, mutants have acted as allegories for minorities, whether it be related to race, gender, sexuality, or even mental illness. After decades of comics, cartoons, action figures and more, the X-Men made their big screen debut in 2000, paving the way for modern superhero movies, before finally going out with a whimper with the recently released New Mutants. Today we're going to give the whole series a look, from Legion to Logan, Deadpool to X-Men Origins, Wolverine.
I think the X-Men movies are one of my favourite mixed bags of movies in cinematic history. I love the X-Men stories. I watched the first X-Men movie when it first came out when I was quite young.
Wow.
And since then, I have been obsessed. My favourite X-Men has changed over the years. I've watched every single movie. I've watched all the cartoons. I've read a good chunk of the comics. Not all. There is a lot of comics to get through.
There is so much.
And I've found that, on the whole, it has always been a mixed bag. And it really comes down to the writers and how well they understand what they're writing. Because the X-Men, like you said, have always been allegories for any kind of minority group. Any kind of one that's downtrodden, the outcasts, which is why I've always felt connected to them. I've always loved seeing their stuff. I've loved watching and reading them just because it's like, yes, these people are different. These people are just outcasts, but they're still really cool. I just wish they calmed down once in a while and stop having sex with each other.
or fighting as well. So the first film was the big introduction. I mean, it's a massive cast. It's the first major introduction to Hugh Jackman.
And hasn't he become a massive thing in cinema?
Yes. As Wolverine, Ian McKellen, Patrick Stewart, Halle Berry, and, James Marsden in supporting roles. It's
a lot of very well-known, very well-liked actors and actresses.
Yeah, and I mean, following films, you had Ryan Reynolds and Ellen Page. Yeah, it's huge.
Been quite good. Alan Cummings.
Oh, yes, Alan Cumming in the second film.
Vinnie Jones playing the Mimi version of Juggernaut, which I personally think was hilarious, but was very poorly received by most people.
I think it's great, to be honest.
Look, I love the stupid meme Juggernaut videos back on YouTube in the day. Just get out of my hair, Charles! Which I quote more than I care to admit, and it really should stop.
Yeah, I mean, X-Men is such a huge thing. It's kind of like you say Deadpool is a part of the X-Men universe, and you're like, really? Wow, okay, it's still the same thing that began 20 years ago.
Yeah, the thing is, you forget that it is part of the actual whole Marvel universe as a whole. They've had crossovers with the Avengers and the Fantastic Four, and, well, everyone basically is crossover with the X-Men and vice versa.
Yeah, well, I mean, not in the movies
yet. But
because of licensing issues, but now that Fox, who own the X-Men and the Fantastic Four, but whatever.
If they decide to keep making X-Men movies after Dark Phoenix and New Mutants, which were not well received.
Well, I think that's kind of the end, which is why it's worth discussing it now.
Yeah.
I mean, there was also TV shows as well, like The Gifted and Legion, which kind of took the series in new directions, but they still tie into the movie universe. And the movie universe is such a mess as well.
It is.
You try and figure it out.
Because they kept getting too many different writers, too many reboots, and they just didn't know what they wanted to do from the start. You can tell a lot of it wasn't planned.
Or it was definitely in the early days, I mean, coming off Batman and Robin, the Joel Schumacher film, which was bright and colourful, and not as bad as it was received. I mean,
no, I still enjoyed it. I recognise it wasn't everyone's cup of tea, but I loved the camp. I think Batman needs camp in his movies.
Definitely. And I think now we've got so many dark and depressing ones.
Look, Christopher Nolan trilogy was fantastic. It was great. It was a brilliant, dark, gritty Batman. Problem is, everyone else keeps trying to remake that. They don't need to. It's already been made.
Exactly, yeah.
Go back to campy over the top Batman.
And with the X-Men, it was like, we got to tone it down. We can't have them in yellow spandex. That would be absurd.
Yeah, exactly, which I wish they'd come back to it and make new ones, because as a society, we are ready for live action over the top silly costumes.
I think it's on the turn. I mean, especially with the Marvel films.
The MCU have proven it. Like, Thor Ragnarok was bright and colourful and bombastic and ridiculous. The next Suicide Squad is going to have all the D-grade villains, and they're going to have faithful, corny costumes, and I could not be happier.
Yeah, the character Peacemaker, played by John Cena, and he looks like he did in the 70s comics, and it's ridiculous. He's like wearing a silver chrome helmet. And
they're going to have, I believe, I can't remember the name, I think it's the detachable man, played by Nathan Fillion, whose power is his arms come off.
His arm fall off, boy, or something.
They're going to have Polka Dot Man, which I am so happy about.
Yeah, I mean, the comics are ridiculous, and these ones were kind of what has allowed us to get to where we are now.
Exactly, and I think it's good. I think we're ready for having more campy, corny comics, but having them treated respectfully, instead of just turning it all into silly jokes.
Yeah, but I think as well, towards the end of its life, X-Men was sort of like pulling it back still. It's like, okay, we'll have some yellow in the costumes, but like it'll just be their shoulders.
You could tell they were still too scared to go for it. And I am sad I never got to see Hugh Jackman in tight yellow spandex.
Well, he has said that, you know, he might come back if they do something like in the MCU, even though they killed him off in Logan. Yeah. Spoilers for a 4-year-old film.
But again, Logan's also meant to be portrayed, and they could easily just retcon that like they did everything else.
Oh, yeah.
They love retconning things there.
Yeah, especially since the newer films, which had Michael Fassbender as Magneto, played originally by Ian McKellen, and Charles Xavier, played by James McAvoy, originally Patrick Stewart.
And who were both fantastic actors and do fantastic jobs as young Charles and Eric, which I was very happy to see.
Yeah, fantastic. It was like 10 years ago they had the reboot, which was First Class, but it's
quite good.
Yeah, Matthew Vaughn, who also went on to do the Kingsman movies, as well as ties to Guy Ritchie and all that. Great film set in the 1960s.
Oh, brilliant.
Fantastic period piece. But then the sequel was set in the 70s. And like, okay, sure, 10 years later.
No one's age, it's fine.
Same actors. But then the last one, Dark Phoenix, is set in the 90s.
And no one looks any different.
No, I mean, Eric's meant to be like in his 60s or 50s, or 70s now even.
And I get that Charles and Eric, you know, have nice healthy diets. They work out, they take care of themselves, but there are limits.
Yeah.
And I don't think they really thought that one through. And I wish they'd focus more on Charles and Eric's dynamic. They have a great chemistry in the movies.
Oh,
the actors are brilliant together. Charles and Eric as characters have always been one of the most fascinating parts of the X-Men comics. These two people who both want the same thing, but they just have vastly different methods and ideologies when it comes to getting to that point.
Yeah. Which I guess we should sort of explain, because, I mean, we've been talking for several minutes now about just random stuff to anyone outside. I mean, yeah, you're going to got these mutants who are superpowered individuals who are different from humans, and they're treated as such. They're ostracized from society. And Charles Xavier, played by Patrick Stewart, again, just to reiterate that, is the man who believes that humans and mutants can live together in harmony.
He wants coexistence.
Yes, and he wants to, you know, use the benefits and the positivity of the mutants and their powers to save the day. To be heroes, to live together. And Eric, Magneto, Holocaust survivor.
Exactly. Yeah, a big part of his character was that he was, in fact, in the Holocaust. He has seen the worst of humanity.
The first scenes of both the original and the reboot First Class begin in a concentration camp when he's a child and his parents are ripped away from him. And
his powers first awaken.
Yeah, he can manipulate metal, and it's an amazingly powerful scene in both.
You have to think about his power, the thing that he uses to define himself, was awakened in that situation. You're going to have some very extreme ideas about the world at that point.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's got the belief that humans are just going to wipe him out, so they should wipe out the humans first.
And you can't exactly say he's wrong in thinking that, given what he's gone through in his life. I mean,
and every other villain in the series as well.
Yeah, the other villains are pretty nasty.
Yeah,
you got some villains that are just pretty typical campy, just I'm evil because evil is fun villains, but they've got ones like Eric, Magneto, who is quite sympathetic and has quite often teamed up with the X-Men throughout the years.
Yes.
He has led the X-Men at some point throughout the years.
And, I mean, human villains like William Stryker, played by Brian Cox.
Who was quite a good villain too.
Yeah, he's got such a presence as well.
His whole thing is just he wants to weaponize them.
Yeah.
Because he's Mr. Big Bad Military Man.
Oh, yeah. And then the third one as well brings about the idea that the mutant gene can be cured, or it can be suppressed. And that brings up interesting discussions there, which aren't fully explored.
And also the way they handle it isn't great when they get the woman who can control the weather to tell the girl who killed everything she touches that she has nothing to be ashamed of and that she's not sick. She's making a good point. They chose the worst possible characters to make that point with.
Yeah, it's like maybe if they had Mr. Blue Man, Nightcrawler, played by Alan Cumming,
who is absolutely fantastic. X-Men 2 is my favourite X-Men movie in the entire series.
I was going to ask you that, yeah.
Alan Cummings as Nightcrawler, who is one of my all-time favourite X-Men, was just brilliant, and I will never forgive them for only using it for one movie.
I think he was sick of it because he's blue, and he's like covered in like scars, which he's carved into himself. You know,
also, they changed the writer and everything in this third one to a not as good writer.
Yeah.
Bryan Singer.
Although, Kelsey Grammer was in
he was
the
great.
third one.
I thought he was
Fraser
brilliant,
Crane himself. I'm listening. As Beast, and he's painted blue, and he comes back for like a 2-second cameo in a later film.
And I will say he was brilliant.
He
really brought across the fact that Beast is this massive, muscular, hungover beast.
He's a lovely guy.
Incredibly verbose, incredibly intelligent. He is an intellectual. He's a man who has spent his life researching. He is well-spoken. He is polite. He's well-mannered, well-dressed. He just also happens to be this big, hulking mass of blue fur and muscle.
With, hands for feet who can hang from the ceiling.
Which is always weird to watch.
The prequel films had Nicholas Hoult, from About a Boy, when he was a boy. He is great, although that last film sort of makes him a bit of a dick.
The last film, I feel, really just... They'd given up at that point. And you can tell they gave up because they tried to do the Dark Phoenix saga again.
Yeah.
Which will never work with such a limited... It's the same reason, as much as I love Civil War in the MCU, it didn't have the scale it should have had.
I mean, with comics, you've got so many issues to build up.
Exactly.
And you can do it over
such
years.
A bigger cast. And also because they chose to have Wolverine, one of the quintessential X-Men in the prequels. Having a Dark Phoenix saga without Wolverine was just strange. And also, this is purely a personal thing, but I wasn't a fan of Sophie Turner's version of Jean Grey.
Yeah. I mean, Jean Grey is this character who
She's boring.
In the comics, though, she is...
Not Emma Frost, and that's a problem.
Yeah, she's got character, she's got personality, she's got a long history.
Jean is a very important part of the X-Men series.
Yeah, and it's when you try and take a long-running story and cram it into 1-2-hour movie, which is why I think they should, in future, forget about doing X-Men movies and maybe do an X-Men series.
I think it would work much better as a series. Because, for instance, all the cartoons of X-Men have been fantastic. The X-Men 90s one, obviously, it's dated a bit. The voice acting is not so great as the 90s, but it's still one of my all-time favourite cartoons. And it builds up these massive arcs. You get to see the culmination, how it all builds towards it, and they have a much bigger cast.
Yes.
And they also have the best X-Men in it. They have Gambit, being all charming and Cajun and dashing.
That never happened.
And Rogue, back before she was all angsty and mopey. And she was still fun and exciting.
Anna Paquin played Rogue in the movies, and I think she's stood by and even saying now to this day that she is done with the character when it's Rogue from the comics, and it hasn't been Rogue from the comics, but who knows if they're going... I think, okay, that's another topic to get into in a second. But these films are, they're a mixed bag. I mean, they were an introduction to me for the X-Men and comic movies as a whole, but I think they were stuck too much in the past, like the MCU made leaps forward and progressed what they could do.
As X-Men was still too scared to be seen as too comic booky.
Yeah.
Which they needed to embrace that comic book heritage.
And I mean, if they do something, I mean, they've got Disney Plus now. They've got Disney money. They could go and make like a 22 episode series every year and just have long ongoing plots. People would tune into it.
Absolutely, I'd watch it.
Yeah, and then you could build towards massive events which they could then release on their streaming service, whether it's a big film, a big two-part, or a big whatever.
And they could do the thing where they spend less money on big-name actors that don't want to be there and more money on making the series good.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I think, was one of the big weaknesses of the first Suicide Squad movie.
Yeah.
They spent all their money on getting the big-name actors and let the studio have their fingers in everything, and it ended up being incredibly bland, uninteresting. It didn't feel like a James Gunn movie.
Yeah.
The sequel looks every bit the James Gunn movie.
Well, it was David Ayer who did that first Suicide Squad film. No, it was David Ayer, Mr. Depressing Man of like End of Watch and
that
Fury.
explains so much then.
Yeah, not very nice films where, I mean, like sure, watching Fury, tank movie, Brad Pitt, grumpy men in a tank.
Those movies can be fantastic, and I think there's absolutely a place for them. I would never say don't make them. But
yeah.
We need more fun in our comic book movies. We've had enough gritty, grungy, miserable people doing gritty, grungy, miserable things.
I suppose you'll be here when we do the Justice League Snyder Cut review in a few months' time.
I can't wait to see how it fixes nothing.
Yeah. Anyway, X-Men. But in regards to the cast, I mean, Jennifer Lawrence played Mystique, who is this blue lady who can shapeshift. And as she became a big-name star, beyond that first film,
she started really phoning it in and stopped caring about the character and not wanting to be there.
And started just being herself rather than Mrs. Blue Lady.
I will say there's no disrespect to the actress, but her rendition of Mystique to me is just not Mystique.
Nah.
Mystique is meant to be this cunning, calculating, ruthless person. I love the character of Mystique because she is everything I look for in a morally grey, sometimes ally, sometimes enemy character.
Well, what do you think about her played by Rebecca Romijn in the first two
I
films?
think she didn't get nearly enough screen time, but when she did, you could see that Rebecca Romijn understood the character more than other iterations have, because Mystique is incredibly skilled. She's like 100 at this point because she doesn't age like humans do. She is very intelligent, very cunning, very good at fighting, and she's utterly ruthless. She will always do everything for her goal and nothing else. She follows Eric because she believes in Eric's cause, and she believes that if Eric succeeds, it will be what's best for her. Which is why I don't like how they did her dirty in the third movie, where she just became a jilted lover, which is not Mystique's character at all.
Horrible.
Mystique is just no time for that crap. She is here to get stuff done.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know, spoiler alert, she is also Nightcrawler's mother, canonically.
Yeah, within the comics.
But they've never touched on that in the movies, which I think is a shame.
With the comics as well, I remember I first picked up an X-Men one, and this is a long ongoing plot point where Professor X has the hots for Jean Grey.
That luckily was retired because the person who wrote that plotline was if I may say this diplomatically, an idiot. Do not make the loving, caring father figure into a creepy old man lusting after his underage student. Who thought that was a good idea?
And then when you're watching Sophie Turner and James McAvoy, which isn't in the films at all, thankfully.
No,
it's not
they
in the
realise it's a terrible plot point and didn't put it in.
But when it's there, you're like...
Oh, because you know that was a thing. They did retire that. I'm very grateful for.
Oh, yes. There's... I mean, okay, so Wolverine within the comic books, Hugh Jackman, massive star. He's basically the headliner of most of the films until they took him out in Logan. You got Logan, which is like an exploration of his character and his final years, and he's aging and he's old and he's dying and he's depressed and he's living in 2020 constantly.
Oh God, yeah.
It's an interesting film, that one. Hey?
I do wish we'd seen them do more with X-21 because she was always a great character in the comics as well.
I think you could maybe,
Well, she is the official, in the comics at the moment, the official successor to Wolverine.
Yeah.
Wolverine was killed off in the comics a few years back, finally, in a very touching final moment, and his mantle was taken up by Laura McKinney, aka X-21, who was his clone. And it never felt forced because it was always building up to she was going to be the next Wolverine.
Yeah.
Wolverine trained her, he raised her, he was like a father to her, she loved him. There was never an aspect of like, I'm better than him. Wolverine was crap, I'm awesome. It was always, Wolverine was her father to him, she loved him, he loved her, and her succeeding him made sense because Wolverine's actual son's a psychopath.
Oh yeah, which of them isn't? He's got many sons, doesn't he?
But to be fair, Dakin did come back in the comics as well. Dakin is Wolverine's son. And he came back as kind of an anti-hero and actually helped Laura become the new Wolverine, which was really nice to see and very quite sweet.
And Logan had her played by 10-year-old actress, a phenomenal acting for a 10-year-old. And I think they could easily bring her back if they wanted to.
I think they could. I think they should.
I mean, especially as she is getting older and they can explore the character as she is. Yeah, I mean, perfectly cast already. So, yeah, if they were to go do... more X-Men within the Marvel Universe, the MCU, Iron Man, Thor, and all that stuff. Do you think they should carry over actors and actresses from the originals?
That's a tough one.
Or just do new ones?
I think it would be strange to do that. Even though some characters are cast perfectly, so it would make sense to have that. At the same time, would it make sense in canon?
Yeah.
So it depends what aspect are they going to go for. Because you can't... I know they like to pick and choose characters from all different parts of the time and just shove them together, but... You do need some kind of consistent canon. And movies can be kind of dodgy about that.
Well, a discussion I've had was like, well, I mean, some characters are so perfectly cast, you can't see anyone else in the role.
That's why they brought J.K. Simmons back as J. Jonah Jameson, because no one could be J. Jonah Jameson as good as...
Yeah, I mean, it is one of those things where you could overthink it and try to over-explain it, like, oh, it's multiverse or whatever. You could just go, oh, no, they were good, and they just ignore it.
Which I think they need to have the courage to do that. Just say, no, these guys are great at this role, so we brought them back.
I mean, you have some characters like Charles Xavier, Patrick Stewart, James McAvoy, great.
Perfect.
In Legion, though, Charles Xavier does come into play. So Legion is... he's a young man, David Haller, who suffers from multiple, mental illnesses. It turns out he's actually got like a mutant parasite living in his brain, feeding off his power.
I think that's actually a plot point too, yeah.
Yeah, and Legion is surreal. It's it's really out there. You've got music sequences and like dance sequences and just
I know in the comics
cutaways to
Legion
stuff.
was Charles Xavier's son.
He is. And Charles Xavier shows up.
Oh, excellent.
Played by Harry Lloyd, a.k.a. Viserys Targaryen.
Interesting.
Son of mine from Doctor Who, Family of Blood. Fantastic, just for playing a young Charles with hair who can still walk, who is, he's in love with the woman and, they have a son and terrible circumstances rip them apart. Patrick Stewart did say he would like to return. He'd like to show up in Legion if it ever happened, cool. But I think the writer very wisely said, while I have the option, it might be a bit bad to use it. Like, it might ruin the story if I did. But yeah, Legion's interesting because it does go in a more cerebral direction, and then Deadpool just breaks the fourth wall and goes insane with it.
And they're all good in their own respect. And I think that's one thing I like about X-Men, because there's so many different characters and stuff in the canon, you could make a lot of different series.
The Gifted as well was a slightly more formulaic network program, which focused on some lesser villains. Lesser mutants within the canon. Polaris, who is canonly Eric's Magneto's daughter.
Yep.
Which is also interesting when you've got his other kids running around in like the movies like Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch.
Exactly, which is also fun to see.
But yeah, it is, even though you never see Ian McKellen, even though you never meet anyone who is like major beyond maybe Blink, who was very briefly in Days of Future Past, is meant to be the same version in The Gifted.
She was really cool.
Yeah, played by Jamie Chung in the series. It's really interesting to see the different side of that and with these lesser villains and how... I keep saying villains. Some of them are. Okay, I'm a mutant. Racist, okay. But yeah, that was... that definitely showed that you could explore these themes in longer form storytelling. I wish they would
explore the mutants more that have powers that aren't just these incredibly cool, make some bad, really cool, powerful people, because that'd give more credence to the way they feel downtrodden. They feel like outcasts. They feel like freaks. For instance, there is a character in the comics whose mutant power is he's about 7 feet tall, very wide, and completely see-through. That's it. And that's not really a useful power in any way. And you can see why, if there was a cure, he might be like, yeah, I'd love to look like an actual person. That'd be brilliant.
Yeah. You've kind of got one character who is exactly as he looks in the comics, and he's like, his skin is made of like black obsidian rock, and he's like got silver cracks over him. And he can't exist in society because he looks like that. And there are other people who are just physically mutated. And there is this sect of mutants who live in the sewers who go and mark themselves with like an M brand on the face to sort of say they've dedicated themselves to living as outsiders, and they're going to shun society and all that stuff. And there is so much interesting stuff. Which
there's characters like Chamber, who is a man who can shoot lasers from his mouth, and when he first used his power, he blew his bottom jaw off.
Oh god!
So now he just has this glowing energy field where his bottom jaw was.
Oof, that's
unfortunate. But they don't really delve into that because they're not quite as marketable in the movies, unfortunately.
And the movies just use the same characters. Sabretooth, Toad, the Blob, Angel, or Archangel have all had like multiple iterations.
They're all iconic characters, but there's so many X-Men to choose from. Like there's this one dude whose power is he has bird bones.
Really?
And a freaky beak-shaped face. He can't fly. He just has hollow bones and a freaky beak-shaped face.
Yeah.
And that's just... Then he tried to fight Magneto and didn't go well.
Oh, no.
He survived, but he just didn't... Yeah. And
Legion, besides Charles and David Haller themselves, has completely new characters and goes in a much more cerebral direction with them. You got one guy who can access people's memories and dig them up if he needs to, but he also remembers everything, like even being in the womb.
Oof.
And then the main... The other lady in it, her power is very similar to Rogue. She can't touch anyone, but she swaps places with them if she touches them. So like her mind goes into their body and their mind goes into her body.
Oh.
So there's this really dark moment where she can't touch anyone, but she tries to have a moment of intimacy by swapping into her mother's body, going into the shower with her mother's boyfriend. But then she switches halfway through, and that creates massive repercussions which affect her into her adult life. It's such a crazy superpower, and because of that she's got all these hang-ups, and she's never been touched, she's never felt love. the villain and that the Shadow King. It's just so cool how he can manifest things from nothing and twist reality to suit his own means. And another character who's played by Jermaine Clement of, Flight of the Conchords, who can like manipulate sound. And there's sequences in that which you have to see to understand and trying to describe it. I don't know how the writer communicated any of this to the crew.
There's a lot of strange and tricky abilities out there, which makes it quite interesting.
Yeah.
And then there's ones that are a bit useless, the ones that were originally useless, they wanted to make sound cool, so they had to try and write it all. There's this one dude who can understand any language he hears. In itself, awesome power. I would love that power. Then they came to try and make him more useful in battle, so they said he can understand the language of architecture. Or he can understand the language of the body and detect what you're going to do in a fight, and that was just stupid. I can understand the language of architecture, therefore I know the structural integrity is faulty there. It's like, that's not how language works.
Oh my god, that is...
Which I think was a waste of a really cool concept, because his whole thing was he could communicate with anyone, which included aliens.
Yeah.
Or people from other dimensions. No matter who they were, he could communicate. He would be the ultimate diplomat.
Speaking of aliens, with Dark Phoenix, very briefly, the final film, like The Last Hurrah before New Mutants, which I haven't seen. You haven't seen either.
No, I just couldn't bring myself to watch it.
And yeah, it doesn't seem to have gone very well.
No, and just the aliens in Dark Phoenix were just very uninspired. They were very dull looking.
I completely forgot they were shapeshifters until...
Yeah, they just kind of showed up and was like, we are evil. Let's do evil things. And that was it. And the movie felt very rushed and like they didn't really think it through. It felt like they just wanted to end. It was like the dying gasp of a dying franchise. And it was sad to see. And it was sad because we got to see Kurt and Storm, who were both brilliant. I love the casting of Kurt and Storm in those movies. I think they're both fantastic. And they completely wasted them.
Yeah.
Not to mention Quicksilver got knocked out in the first 2 minutes.
It is a shame that these films started the trend that we have today. We have Guardians of the Galaxy in part thanks to X-Men.
Exactly. And it's sad to see how they've just kind of fallen by the wayside because they just didn't move forward with the times. Like
they didn't care.
They didn't embrace the camp.
No.
And there's a lot of camp to be had in X-Men.
Which is why I definitely say that the TV shows kind of...
I think that would be the best option.
Yeah.
Make a good series, a good, decent budget series. It would be fantastic.
Definitely.
Because there's so many stories to tell and so many directions you can take in X-Men and so many ways you can make characters for young people to connect to, which is always great.
But if you do fancy watching these, I think they're all on Disney+.
I believe so, yes.
It'll be interesting to see if Legion makes it there. Because that's quite a dark show.
I will say, we might have sounded like we're shitting on it, but we do generally adore a lot of these movies.
Yeah, I think it's just disappointment that they took the route they did.
They did.
Because we were fans of them. That's our discussion today of the X-Men movies. Check them out on Disney Plus if they sound interesting. Legion and The Gifted are on Foxtel if you have those. I'm Royce.
I'm Jacob.
And we'll see you next time. Bye for now.